Hi, and welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. There's a new report out that details how the livestock and poultry feed industry can implement environmentally responsible practices and help create sustainable, climate resistant global food systems. Joining us to talk about that report is Ellen Dierenfeld, lead specialist for sustainable feed innovation with the World Wildlife Fund. Welcome, Ellen. So nice to have you with us today.
Hi, Sarah. Nice to see you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. So, as we get started, for those of you that are joining us online, a reminder that you can post any questions you might have there in the chat on the right hand side of your screen. Or if you're joining us from social media, you can post those right in the feed and we will see those here and we will get those questions over to Ellen. So, Ellen, let's start by you telling us a bit about yourself. I understand you have a bit of a background in agriculture and nutrition.
Sure. I was raised in rural Iowa in a small town in Poweshiek County. My father is a large animal veterinarian, so we had exposure to a lot of different critters, not just farm animals, but some unusual pets over the years. Pigs in the kitchen, chickens in the kitchen, um, an alligator at one point. Um, and I did my undergraduate in animal science at Iowa State. Was in 4-H through all of my school years, undergraduate years, and did my graduate work in animal nutrition at Cornell University, where I focused on sort of comparative aspects of animal nutrition, um, doing my master's thesis on giant pandas, and then did some work with kangaroos, rabbits, and wombats in Australia for my doctorate. And spent then several decades actually working in wildlife and zoo nutrition at the Wildlife Conservation Society and St. Louis zoos before I went to work for Novus International and now the World Wildlife Fund. So I've fed a lot of different critters over the years and worked with a lot of different feedstuffs.
Very interesting background. That's fascinating. So now in early 2022, the American Feed Industry Association, their Institute for Feed and Education Research, also called iFeeder for those of you that know it by that, partnered with World Wildlife Fund to convene a feed industry group to look at feed systems. You held a sustainability summit, I believe, right? And the purpose was to advance a vision for feed sustainability and to elevate the learnings and to kind of set some best practices. Tell us more about that partnership between the feed industry and World Wildlife Fund and why you're working together on these things.
Oh, certainly. I mean, we work with the same partners, really. So they're working with various aspects of the feed industry, corporate partners. We also have corporate partners with WWF, and together um, we're stronger at hitting some of these sustainability issues and needs. So the Feed Summit and accompanying case studies from people that contributed were a focus of this summit where we could all come together, talk about some of the learnings, some of the goals, where we can be going, and how we can get there together because we all realize that no one can do it alone. There's no single solution that works. And and we need to have these strong partnerships to meet the goals of getting solutions to scale and at the speed we need.
So it sounds like there are some specific goals as part of this partnership. Can you tell us more about that? I think we've got some slides here. There we go.
Certainly. One of the things that we focus on through WWF certainly are some of the impacts of the feed system on the environment. And there's several different ways that feed specifically can make a huge impact on minimizing some of these negative aspects. One of them is to um, source feed ingredients that have been uh, uh, that don't uh, convert land. So some of
Mhm.
the most sensitive environments, the forests, the grasslands, the wetlands, into croplands, are part of the big problem in terms of some of the emissions that we're seeing and land use changes and deforestation, not just nationally, but globally. And so, working with ingredients that have committed to not converting lands is an important component. A second one is looking at some of the farming practices or production practices that go into some of the feed ingredients um, that are listed here on this slide, like agroforestry or um, working with practices that sequester carbon and improve the soil health, water use aspects through regenerative or conservation agriculture practices. So again, another important aspect of working within the feed system for some of our ingredients. And thirdly, working with specific ingredients and feeding practices that are known to reduce emissions. And that can be uh, something like minimizing energy use, even in manufacturing or transportation practices, but also working with precision nutrition. So we're not wasting nutrients or food and contributing to some of the emissions that go along with it. And that includes manure management. If we've got a more digestible diet, we've got less manure too. Um, and then dealing with specific feed additives or feeding practices that could minimize enteric fermentation or the greenhouse gases that are belched out by ruminant, which contribute to some of the greenhouse gases of agriculture. So some of these, particularly the landscape level, the land use conversion and the carbon sequestration, can have some very big impacts from an ingredient perspective, even larger than some of those specific emissions reduction solutions that have been identified. And these are things that we're trying to put out there, quantify, and just give examples of how different systems or different players in the feed systems can target something that's of priority or relevance to them.
Would you say you're in the kinda early stages of going through that and putting some of that quantification, and putting some actuals to some of these things, or are you fairly far along in that process?
Well, I think there's a lot of good models out there already. So we've got some of these predictive models of where we can expect to see changes. And many of the corporate partners are setting targets for reducing some of these different aspects as part of their sustainability goals. So helping um, define those targets and then quantifying progress towards those goals is absolutely a big part of the whole sustainability journey.
And I believe there's certain critical components. I think there's 4 that you've identified, as part of a sustainable feed strategy. What can you walk us
Right,
through those?
right. Coming out of the um, the feed summit, we had a number, as I said, of case studies that were submitted. So we actually were able to bucket those into 4 main categories that are displayed here on the slide. Um, and the fact is that the feed industry is already doing a lot of these and has been for decades. We just may not be getting the story out there wide enough or deep enough to let people know. So, some examples of these sustainable systems in action. So, for the responsible sourcing, many corporations are making commitments to those targets for reducing environmental impacts and taking action. So it's the deforestation and conversion free ingredients. They're certifying that their ingredients meet those goals as part of their action commitments. A lot of them are tracking emissions, again, as part of those goals. And there's several companies and tools out there that are incorporating environmental impact metrics into feed formulation software so that we can actually use the environmental impact as another measure of sustainability in our feed formulations, and not just be looking at conversion efficiencies or least cost formulation, but add that other metric to it. So examples of some of the circular ingredients that are going into um, the feed industry. Again, this has been done for many years. We've got lots of byproducts and co-products coming out of grain processing or the brewery or distiller industries that go directly into um, animal diets as specific feed ingredients or components of formulated diets. We also work with food and beverage residuals from human food waste, bakery waste, fruit and vegetable pulps. When products are packaged for human food, some of those leftovers can be readily incorporated into animal diets and have been, as I said, for years. So again, the feed industry has been doing this, and even at the retail level where grocery store waste is getting
Mhm.
recirculated back into animal feeds. But we need to get those stories out there to let people know that this is happening on a much bigger scale than I think a lot of people recognize, because it resonates with the consumer that cares about sustainability in the feed system. Some of the regenerative agriculture practices that are coming about, I mean, as simple as no-till farming, or keeping cover crops on the ground year round, or changing your rotation schedule um, to ensure that we've got soil management as well as water use and minimal emissions coming, and minimal resource losses in the farming practices. It's all part of sustainability actions that are going into the entire system. And lastly, some of the feeding innovations, again, not necessarily new. The breeds for animals as well as feed materials, plant materials that have been genetically selected for optimal growth or nutritional principles, digestibility, or water use is all part of sustainable action. There are a number of alternative proteins on the market that are being incorporated into feeds. For example, the single cell proteins or algae as feed ingredients, or insects meals. Um, Feed additives, anything that improves the health, efficiency, and nutritional balance in any of our livestock species really has a sustainable component to it. And we have to recognize that and let the public know that this is what we do with animal nutrition and feeding to minimize some of the negative impacts. And then some of these precision systems, and I'm not talking just about ingredients here. Obviously, getting the ingredient balance right is important, but it's even something like having the inline near infrared quality control measures in manufacturing plants, such that if a new load of an ingredient comes in and it's slightly different in nutrient composition, the automation can automatically pick that up, reformulate, and keep a consistent quality and product coming out to optimize the feed at the other end. So it's not just, as I say, ingredient innovations, but it's system innovations throughout the entire process that become important for sustainability. So while we bucketed these into four areas, they're all really come under the bigger picture of responsible sourcing for any of the ingredients that go into our feeding systems, including responsible sourcing of for grazing animals, because different aspects come into play there too.
You have these 4 buckets. Are any of them more important than others?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say because the system is complex and integrated, the whole feed chain, um, and that we know that there's no single solution that works. So we have to be working with what may be most appropriate in each of the different aspects of the feed value chain. So rather than say one's more important than the other, we have to be looking at how they work together, which is kind of why I like the integrated um, model of a responsible sourcing, because what may be a priority or the most effective in one aspect may not be appropriate in another part of the feed chain.
So it's really about that collective, and collaborative action then when you're looking at how we're going to address sustainability across the feed value chain. Is that fair to say?
I think that's absolutely right. And we've got to show the various aspects because they're going to resonate differently with different people at either the upstream or the downstream end of the food and feed chain. And so the more examples that we can get out there of sustainable action, the more we can get that messaging across that we're making a difference.
Have you taken a look at all to kind of bounce off consumer groups in terms of what messaging might resonate more than other messaging? Or does it really depend on that, on certain segments are going to want certain types of messaging? Have you dug in that deep at this point?
Me personally, no. There certainly are people looking at those aspects, and but I think you're exactly right. What's going to be priority, um, or what works in a particular culture, be it a corporate culture or a bigger community culture, is going to differ depending on geographies, depending on many aspects. So this is why having multiple solutions identified and stressing that it's the collaboration and the partnerships that are going to make it more effective and stronger across the entire food chain.
We do have a question that's come in from our audience, so I'd like to address that at this point. So, last week they said they attended VIV Asia, which was in Bangkok, I believe, and there were multiple presentations discussing the removal of soy from animal diets because soy could not be grown locally within reason. So the carbon footprint then was calculated for hauling of soy from long distances, all those kinds of things come into play. What do you think is the economic impact of that versus using a lesser protein source when it comes to soy versus lesser protein sources? Is there a groundswell of sourcing materials locally on a global basis that you're aware of? And, may we see that here in the US where, or are we going to see soy continuing to be something that's easy for us to access and probably a main part of our rations?
Well, coming from Iowa, corn and soybean state, I love corn and soybeans, but not everything has to live just on corn and soybeans. It works in our system because we have it available and we aren't having to pay some of these longer transportation distances. And if we can ensure that it's not, contributing to deforestation and land use change, that gives it a more sustainable footprint. That being said, I would say we're not looking to replace soy with lesser proteins. What we're looking to do is um, have alternative sources of nutrients that may be more locally available and economic in different areas to supply the same nutrient balance and have the same similar or same results in terms of production and health of the livestock that are consuming it. So there are alternative protein sources out there that can replace when soy isn't the best option from a sustainability perspective. But it absolutely is not it's not a one shot fits all. It works in some areas. Some of these alternatives will work in some areas better than others for a multiple of reasons. But what we're trying to do is optimize the nutrition and health of the livestock being fed these various diets and different diet ingredients.
Good point. So what are the next steps then between in the partnership between World Wildlife Fund and the feed industry and iFeeder? Are there things that are in the works?
Well, specifically right now, we value the opportunity to work together, and we're continuing to explore some of the options for some future collaborations, but nothing's on the table specifically at the moment.
So let's talk for a minute about the report. You had a report that was issued, I think it was last week.
Mhm.
What can folks expect to see in that report? And our team's going to post the link to that in the chats there for anyone who wants to look at that. It's also in the bottom if you scroll down on Feedstuffs 365. So tell us about solutions to meet the need for feed.
Well, what we're trying to emphasize is that feed is a big part of agriculture's footprint. And so we do have some of the metrics of what feed is contributing to from a global greenhouse gas perspective and water use perspective. So we've laid out why it's important and trying to uh, clarify that it's essential that we make some changes within the feed system to meet some of these goals that are 1.5 or 2.0 degree or 2 degree um, increases in temperature by some of the target dates that we're aiming for. But the feed system as a whole can be a real leader in this because, as I showed, there's a lot of examples of where we're doing it, and we've got a lot of people coming together to multiply those efforts through collaborations and partnership, and we can make a big difference. And probably we can make even additive effects by adding multiple solutions at the same time. So then we've worked out, or we use some of the examples from our case studies at the Feed Summit as just examples of those 4 buckets of solutions to try to get people thinking of how their particular system or priorities may fit into one or other of those buckets, and contribute to the bigger picture for environmental, minimizing some of the environmental impacts of feed.
Any closing comments for our viewers here today, Ellen, as we wrap up?
Um, I just want to say that I think it's really exciting to be in agriculture right now. So, after being working with this agriculture for my whole life, really, in various aspects, people are really starting to get excited about what can be done um, to to minimize some of the impacts, the negative impacts that have been identified from livestock, particularly, and feed production in the bigger agricultural picture. So as I said, it's an exciting time to be in this field and look forward to some of our leaders really making a difference. And because we're all starting to identify that we're running out of time and we've got to do this together.
Great points. So I want to thank you so much for your time and insight, Ellen. Thank you for joining
You.
us.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to share.
That's Ellen Dierenfeld, lead specialist for sustainable feed solutions with the World Wildlife Fund. We appreciate all of you that have tuned in today to join us as well. We want to let you know, too, that still ahead this week on Friday at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern, we'll be talking with Tyson Foods about its efforts to create a more sustainable beef industry. If you missed it this week, Tyson did have some big announcements, so we're going to be digging into those, and that included a climate smart beef program as well as the launch of braised beef, which is a first of its kind climate friendly beef product. So that's a live discussion as well, so you won't want to miss that. Until then, for Feedstuffs 365, I'm Sarah Muirhead.